Zimora was a bright and kind-hearted girl, loved dearly by her father, Kwale, a skilled hunter known throughout the village. Her mother, Maisha, had been a gentle woman who treated everyone with kindness. But when Maisha fell ill and passed away, everything changed for Zimora. Grief weighed heavily on Kwale, and in his loneliness, he remarried a woman named Nabiba. At first, Nabiba seemed caring, but the moment she became Kwale's wife, her true nature was revealed. From the very beginning, Nabiba resented Zimora. She hated how much Kwale adored his daughter and saw her as a reminder of his first wife. While Kwale was away hunting, Nabiba made Zimora's life miserable. She forced the girl to wake up before dawn to clean the house, fetch water, and prepare meals, all while receiving nothing but insults in return. While Nabiba and the other children in the household ate well, Zimora was given only scraps, barely enough to fill her stomach. At night, Zimora would lie awake, exhausted and hungry, wondering why her father no longer seemed to notice her suffering. She tried to tell him once, but Nabiba quickly twisted the story, making it seem as though Zimora was lazy and disrespectful. Kwale, already burdened with his own troubles, sighed and told his daughter to listen to her stepmother. From that moment on, Zimora kept quiet, swallowing her pain, hoping that one day her father would see the truth. But the days passed, and things only got worse. As the months passed, Nabiba's hatred for Zimora grew stronger. No matter how much she mistreated the girl, there was still a spark in Zimora's eyes, a quiet strength that Nabiba despised. She wanted Zimora gone, but she knew she could not simply cast her out without reason. So, she began planting seeds of doubt in Kwale's mind. One evening, as Kwale sat by the fire sharpening his hunting spear, Nabiba sighed heavily beside him. "Have you not noticed, my husband?" she whispered, glancing toward the hut where Zimora slept. "Ever since Misha died, strange misfortunes have fallen upon this household. The crops have not grown well this season. The river ran dry earlier than expected. And have you not noticed how animals no longer come near when you hunt? This is not normal." Kwale frowned. It was true. He had struggled to catch prey lately. He had blamed it on bad luck. But now, Nabiba's words made him uneasy. "What are you saying?" he asked. Nabiba lowered her voice, leaning closer. "Zimora, she carries a curse. I have seen it in my dreams. A spirit of misfortune follows her. That is why the ancestors took Maisha away, and why nothing prospers in this home. If we do not act, worse things will happen." Kwale shook his head. "She is just a child," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. "She is not just a child," Nabiba insisted. "She is the root of our suffering. The ancestors will not bless us as long as she remains here." Day after day, Nabiba repeated these words, filling Kwale's mind with fear and doubt. She pointed out every small misfortune, twisting reality to fit her story. Slowly, Kwale's heart hardened toward his daughter. He stopped looking at her with love. When she called out to him, he barely responded. When she tried to speak, he turned away. The father who once carried her on his shoulders now treated her like a stranger. Then, Nabiba gave birth to a son, Django. The entire household celebrated, and for the first time in a long while, Kwale smiled. He held his newborn son with pride, declaring that he would grow to be a strong hunter like his father. But as he rejoiced, Zimora stood in the corner, unnoticed, forgotten. She watched as her father showered love upon the baby, love that he had once given her. Her heart ached, but she said nothing. Now that Nabiba had Kwale completely under her control, she was ready for the final step. One night, as Kwale prepared for sleep, Nabiba spoke again. "The ancestors have given us another chance," she said, stroking Django's tiny hand. "But Zimora's curse still lingers. We must rid ourselves of her before she brings harm to our son." Kwale's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" Nabiba's eyes gleamed with cruelty. "Take her deep into the jungle and leave her there. The spirits will decide her fate. If she is innocent, they will protect her. But if she is truly cursed, nature will take its course." Kwale hesitated. Somewhere deep inside, a part of him knew this was wrong. But Nabiba had spent too long poisoning his mind. He looked down at his son, so small and fragile in his arms. He could not risk his family's future. He exhaled heavily and nodded. "Tomorrow night," he said. A wicked smile spread across Nabiba's face. Her plan was finally in motion. By this time tomorrow, Zimora would be gone forever. The night air was heavy with the scent of damp earth as Nabiba led Zimora down a narrow path into the jungle. The towering trees swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Zimora clutched the small basket Nabiba had given her, her bare feet brushing against fallen leaves. She had been surprised when Nabiba asked for her help in gathering special herbs. It was the first time her stepmother had spoken to her kindly in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, Nabiba was beginning to accept her. They walked deeper into the forest, far beyond where Zimora had ever gone before. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the eerie calls of night creatures. Zimora's heart beat faster, but she said nothing. If this was a chance to prove herself useful, she would take it. Suddenly, Nabiba stopped in a small clearing. Moonlight filtered through the thick canopy, casting silver patches on the ground. She turned to Zimora with a forced smile. "Wait here, child. The herbs I need are not far. I will return soon." Zimora nodded and knelt to examine the ground, trying to spot any useful plants. Minutes passed, then more. She glanced up. The jungle stretched around her, dark and endless. The wind picked up, rustling the trees. Nabiba was taking too long. A cold feeling crept up Zimora's spine. "Stepmother!" she called. No answer. She stood up, hugging her arms. "Nabiba!" Her voice cracked. Silence. Fear tightened in her chest. Something was wrong. She spun around, looking for the path they had taken, but the jungle all looked the same. The shadows shifted, twisting into shapes her mind didn't want to name. Then she heard it, a low, deep growl in the distance. Her breath hitched. The sound came again, closer this time. The undergrowth rustled, and Zimora froze as she saw them. Eyes, glowing golden in the darkness. 1 pair, 2, 5, more. The lions had found her. A sharp sob escaped her lips. Her legs refused to move, her body frozen in terror. The great beasts moved slowly, their heavy paws pressing into the earth without a sound. They were watching her, waiting. A single thought broke through her fear. Run! Her body obeyed before her mind could catch up. She turned and bolted, feet pounding against the dirt. The lions growled behind her. A branch snagged her dress, tearing the fabric, but she didn't stop. Then she saw it. A tree, its branches thick and sturdy. Without thinking, she leaped, grasping at the rough bark. Scrambling up as high as she could, she clung to the trunk, panting. Below, the lions circled, tails swishing. One lifted its massive head, locking eyes with her. Zimora pressed a hand over her mouth to silence her sobs. She was alone, trapped in the heart of the jungle, with nothing but hungry eyes staring up at her. Zimora clung to the rough bark of the tree, her fingers aching as she tried to steady her breathing. Below, the lions prowled, their golden eyes locked on her trembling form. One of the largest, a massive lion with a dark mane, took a slow step forward. His muscles tensed, his mouth slightly open, revealing sharp fangs. A deep growl rumbled in his throat, and Zimora squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a desperate prayer. Then, suddenly, everything changed. A new sound echoed through the jungle. Not a growl, but a low, commanding rumble. The lions below froze, their ears twitched, their heads turning toward the shadows beyond the clearing. A presence stirred in the darkness, and then, stepping into the moonlight, came a creature unlike any Zimora had ever seen. It was a lion, but not like the others. Its coat was pure white, glowing under the pale light of the moon. Its eyes, sharp and knowing, swept across the scene. The other lions hesitated, their bodies lowering in submission. The great white lion moved with quiet authority, each step light yet powerful, as if it belonged to another world entirely. Zimora's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories of a white lion, a guardian of the land, a creature of legend. No one in the village had ever seen it, only whispered about its existence. And now, here it was, standing just beneath her, its gaze fixed upon her face. The white lion took another step forward. The others did not move. It let out a soft huff, almost like a sigh, then lifted its head toward her. Zimora, unsure what to do, clung to the tree, her heartbeat wild. Then, as if sensing her fear, the lion made a sound, a deep, reassuring chuff, almost comforting. Slowly, cautiously, Zimora loosened her grip and slid down the trunk. Her bare feet touched the cold earth, and she stood frozen as the white lion approached. She braced for pain, for teeth sinking into her skin, but instead, the lion did something she never could have imagined. It licked her wounds. The roughness of its tongue grazed her bruised arms, her scraped knees. A warm, tingling sensation spread through her body. Not painful, but soothing. The lion's golden eyes never left hers, as if searching for something deep within her soul. The other lions, watching in silence, slowly lowered themselves onto their haunches. One by one they sat, forming a protective ring around her. Their hunger, their wildness, it was gone. They were no longer predators. They were guardians. Zimora's legs wobbled, her body overwhelmed with exhaustion, shock, and the impossible reality before her. She had been left to die, abandoned to the mercy of the jungle. But now, in the heart of the night, she was not alone. The great white lion had come for her, her vision blurred, the world spinning as her body gave into the weight of the moment. As she collapsed onto the soft earth, the last thing she saw was the white lion lowering itself beside her, watching over her like a silent protector. Then, darkness took her. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the sky, painting the horizon in soft shades of gold and pink. The village was still quiet, the morning air cool and fresh. But then, a strange murmur spread through the huts, waking people from their sleep. It started as a whisper, then grew into anxious voices. "Lions!" someone gasped. "At the village gates!" Fear gripped the hearts of the villagers. Lions never came this close, never dared to enter human territory. Women clutched their children, men reached for their spears, ready to defend their home. But when they stepped outside and looked toward the gates, what they saw made them freeze in place. There, just beyond the entrance, lay a sight no one could have ever imagined. Zimora. She was curled up on the ground, her face peaceful, as if in a deep sleep. Around her, forming a silent circle, sat lions, great golden beasts with powerful bodies and piercing eyes. And at the center of them all stood the most astonishing creature of all, a massive white lion, its fur glowing in the soft morning light. Gasps filled the air. Some villagers fell to their knees, whispering prayers. Others clung to one another, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The white lion, an elder breathed. The guardian of the land. The lions did not move. They simply sat there, as if they had spent the entire night protecting the sleeping girl. Not a single villager dared to step closer. The air was thick with both fear and wonder. Then, as if sensing their time had come, the lions slowly began to rise. One by one, they turned toward the forest, their tails swaying lazily behind them. The white lion lingered for a moment longer, gazing down at Zimora before lifting its great head to the sky. With one last look at the astonished villagers, the white lion let out a low, rumbling sound, something between a growl and a farewell. Then, with slow, graceful steps, it turned and followed its pride back into the jungle. Within moments, they were gone, swallowed by the thick trees, as if they had never been there at all. For a long time, no one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. Then, at last, one of the elders stepped forward and knelt beside Zimora. He placed a gentle hand on her forehead, and to everyone's relief, her eyes fluttered open. She blinked, confused, looking around at the faces staring down at her. "The lions," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They protected you," the elder said in awe. "They brought you back." Murmurs of amazement swept through the crowd. Children whispered excitedly. Women clutched their chests in disbelief, and the village chief stepped forward, his expression unreadable. This was no ordinary child, no mere girl. Something greater had happened here, and from that moment on, nothing in the village would ever be the same again. The village remained in stunned silence as Zimora sat up, rubbing her tired eyes. The warmth of the sun touched her face, but she felt different, as if something beyond her understanding had just happened. The memory of the night before was still fresh in her mind. The glowing eyes in the darkness, the powerful presence of the white lion, the strange feeling of safety instead of fear. The elders gathered around, whispering among themselves. Then, Baba Muntu, the wisest and oldest in the village, stepped forward. His weathered face was filled with wonder as he looked down at Zimora. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder, his voice low and filled with something almost like reverence. "There is an ancient tale," Baba Muntu began, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. "A legend passed down through the generations. It is said that the great white lion only appears before those of royal blood, those who carry the mark of a true leader." Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the crowd. People exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, while others looked skeptical. "But what does that have to do with Zimora?" someone asked hesitantly. Baba Muntu turned his gaze toward the village chief, his expression heavy with meaning. "Many years ago, before most of you were born, there was a king, a ruler of a distant land. He was betrayed by those he trusted, forced to flee, leaving behind all that he had. His only child, a baby girl, was hidden away to protect her from those who sought to destroy his bloodline. That child was brought here, where she grew up as one of us. Her name was Maisha." Gasps filled the air. The villagers turned to one another in shock. Maisha, Zimora's mother, was the lost princess of a fallen kingdom. Zimora stared up at Baba Muntu, her heart pounding. Her mother, a princess. She had never heard such a story before. All she had known was that her mother was a kind and loving woman, taken from her too soon. But as she thought back, little things began to make sense. The way Maisha carried herself, the quiet dignity in her voice, the stories she used to tell Zimora as a child about lands far beyond their village. The lions knew, Baba Muntu continued. They saw the truth in her blood. That is why they did not harm her. They protected her as they once protected the rulers of the old kingdom. Zimora is of royal descent, a child of the exiled king. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Nabiba, who had been hiding in the shadows, paled. Her wicked plan had been built on lies, but now the truth had come to light in a way no one could deny. Kwale, Zimora's father, stepped forward, his face filled with regret. He had let himself be blinded by Nabiba's words, had turned his back on his own daughter, but now he saw the truth. The daughter he had abandoned was far greater than he had ever imagined. Zimora, still sitting on the ground, felt tears sting her eyes. She had always thought of herself as just a simple girl, unwanted and mistreated, but now she realized she was more than that. She was strong, she was chosen, and her story was only just beginning. Nabiba's heart pounded in her chest as she stood behind her hut, listening to the excited voices of the villagers. She had been certain that Zimora would never return. Yet here she was, alive, unharmed, and surrounded by whispers of a great destiny. Nabiba's hands trembled. She knew that if the truth came out, she would lose everything. She straightened her back and forced a smile before stepping forward. "What is all this nonsense?" she called out, her voice higher than usual. "You are all celebrating as if something great has happened, but this girl disappeared on her own. Now she has returned, spinning foolish tales." A few villagers turned to her, uncertain, but before anyone could speak, a deep voice cut through the crowd. "Lies." All heads turned toward the speaker, an old hunter named Babu Tembo. His face was worn with age, his eyes sharp as an eagle's. He stepped forward, leaning on his wooden staff, and pointed a wrinkled finger at Nabiba. "I saw you," he said, his voice firm. "I saw you take the girl deep into the jungle under the cover of darkness. I was returning from a hunting trip when I noticed you walking fast, looking over your shoulder. I hid in the trees and watched as you abandoned the child in a clearing, whispering to yourself that she would never return." Gasps filled the air. All eyes were now on Nabiba, whose face turned as pale as the morning mist. That's not true," she stammered, stepping back. "Why would I do such a thing?" The village chief, a tall man with a heavy presence, stepped forward, his face dark with anger. "Because you wanted her gone," he said. "Because you fed her father lies, poisoned his heart, and turned him against his own daughter." Nabiba shook her head furiously. "No, these are just stories. Who would believe the words of an old man over mine?" But Baba Muntu, the elder, stepped forward. "The lions believed Zimora's truth. The ancestors protected her. And now the spirits have guided Babu Tembo to speak. Are you calling them liars too?" Nabiba's lips trembled. She looked around for help, for someone to defend her, but the villagers had already made up their minds. Some looked disgusted, others furious. Even Kwale, her husband, stood frozen, realization and regret filling his eyes. "You will confess," the chief said, his voice like thunder, "or we will take your silence as guilt." The weight of their stares pressed down on Nabiba like a crushing stone. She could not escape this. Tears sprang to her eyes, and finally, she dropped to her knees. "I did it," she whispered, then louder, her voice cracking. "I did it. I left her there. I wanted her gone. I was afraid that she would take everything from me, that Kwale would always love her more than my son. I thought if she disappeared, we would all be free." Silence, heavy, thick, unbreakable. Then, the chief spoke again, his voice cold as the wind before a storm. "You have sealed your own fate, Nabiba." The village square was silent except for the crackling of the fire in the center. The elders sat in a circle, their faces stern as they delivered their judgment. The entire village had gathered, watching as Nabiba knelt before them, her face stained with tears. Jengo, her young son, clung to her, confused and frightened. "Nabiba," the chief's voice rang out, deep and commanding, "for your wickedness, for abandoning an innocent child to the mercy of the jungle, for poisoning your husband's heart with lies, you are no longer welcome in this village. From this day forward, you are banished." A murmur swept through the crowd. Banishment was the harshest punishment. It meant losing everything: home, protection, family. Nabiba gasped, shaking her head. "No, please. I made a mistake. I will do anything. I will serve the village. I will—" "Enough!" the chief's voice cut through her pleading. The ancestors have spoken. Justice must be served. Tears streamed down Nabiba's face as she clutched Django tightly. Please, think of my son. He is just a child. He has done nothing wrong. Baba Muntu, the wise elder, stepped forward. And yet you would have left another child to die alone. His voice was filled with sorrow. You must leave before the sun sets. Nabiba turned to Kwali, desperation in her eyes. Husband, speak for me. Beg them to change their minds. But Kwali only lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. Guilt weighed on him like a heavy stone. He had let himself be blinded by Nabiba's words, had ignored his own daughter, had let her suffer under his own roof. He had failed as a father. His voice trembled as he spoke. I was a fool. He turned to Zimora, who stood beside Baba Muntu, strong despite everything she had endured. My daughter, I failed you. I let lies poison my heart. I let you suffer when you did nothing wrong. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I beg for it. His knees hit the ground as he bowed before her. Please, Zimora, forgive me. A hush fell over the crowd. Zimora's eyes glistened, but she remained silent for a long moment. Finally, she stepped forward, lifting her father to his feet. I forgive you, she said softly. A relieved sob escaped Kwale's lips, but before he could speak, Zimora continued. But I will not return to your home. Kwale's heart clenched. Zimora, I cannot live in the house where I was unwanted, she said firmly. I have found my place. My path is no longer with you. Tears welled in Kwale's eyes, but he nodded. I understand. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Nabiba and Django were led to the village gates. She turned one last time, her eyes filled with bitterness and regret. But no one spoke for her. No one stopped her. She had sealed her own fate, and justice had finally been served. The village gathered once more, but this time, the air was not heavy with judgment or fear. It was filled with awe and celebration. People stood in silence, their eyes fixed on Zimora, the girl who had been left to die but had returned with the blessing of the sacred lions. The chief, dressed in his finest robes, raised his staff and spoke with deep reverence. The ancestors have spoken through the lions, he said. Zimora is no ordinary child. She was protected by the sacred white lion, a guardian of our land. This is a sign. She has been chosen to protect and guide us. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some villagers lowered their heads in shame, remembering how they had turned a blind eye to her suffering. Others beamed with pride, realizing they had witnessed a living legend. Baba Muntu, the eldest and wisest of the village, stepped forward and placed a beaded necklace around Zimora's neck, a symbol of leadership and wisdom. His wrinkled hands rested gently on her shoulders. From this day forward, you will train under me, he said. You will learn the ways of the ancestors, the secrets of the land, and the wisdom of those who came before us. In time, you will take your rightful place as a protector of this village. Zimora's heart swelled. She had spent years feeling invisible, unwanted, like she had no place in this world. Now, she was being given a purpose, a path that was truly hers. She looked around at the faces of the people, at the children who gazed up at her with admiration, at the elders who nodded in approval. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as a burden, not as an outcast, but as someone who mattered. That night, as the village celebrated with music and dance, Zimora sat beside Baba Muntu, listening intently as he spoke of the old ways. He taught her about the stars, the winds, the spirits that guided the land. He told her stories of the warriors and healers who had come before her, of the strength she would need to carry the weight of leadership. You have endured pain, child, Baba Muntu said, his voice kind but firm. But pain shapes those who are meant for greatness. Never forget where you came from, for it will guide you to where you are meant to be. Zimora nodded, his words sinking deep into her heart. She was no longer the girl begging for love from a father who had turned away. She was no longer the frightened child left to die in the jungle. She was Zimora, chosen by the sacred lions, destined for something greater than she had ever imagined. As she closed her eyes that night, she did not dream of fear or loneliness. Instead, she saw the white lion watching her from the shadows, its golden eyes filled with pride. She was ready for the journey ahead. Years passed, and Zimora grew into a wise and respected leader. The villagers often sought her guidance, not just for healing, but also for wisdom in times of trouble. She had learned the ancient ways from Baba Muntu, mastering the secrets of the land, the herbs that healed, and the traditions that kept the village strong. People trusted her, admired her, and saw her as more than just a girl who had once been abandoned. She was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even the darkest nights could lead to the brightest dawns. Children would gather around her, eager to hear the story of the night she was left in the jungle. With a gentle smile, Zimora would tell them about the glowing eyes in the dark, the moment of fear that had nearly consumed her, and the white lion that had saved her. Each time, she reminded them that courage was not about never feeling afraid. It was about standing strong, even when fear tried to break them. Some nights, the villagers swore they saw the white lion at the edge of the forest, its golden eyes watching over the village. Though no one dared to go near, they felt no fear, only comfort. To them, it was a sign that Zimora was still protected, still chosen. Many believed the lion would always be with her, just as the ancestors had always watched over their people. As for Nabiba, her name was spoken only in hushed whispers. After being cast out, she had vanished without a trace. Some said she had wandered into the jungle, the very same one where she had abandoned Zimora, never to return. Others believed the spirits of the land had punished her for her cruelty, ensuring she paid for the pain she had caused. But no one truly knew what had happened to her. Zimora never searched for Nabiba, nor did she hold hatred in her heart. She had long since let go of the past, choosing instead to focus on the future. She had a village to protect, people who relied on her, and a destiny she was meant to fulfill. The story of the girl who was left for the lions, but returned stronger than ever, became a legend, passed down from generation to generation. Parents told their children of her courage, elders reminded the young to always respect the ways of the land, and travelers who passed through the village marveled at the tale of the white lion. And so, Zimora's name lived on, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a symbol of strength, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of those who are truly meant to lead.